The whispers started the moment Beatrice Nolan's father dragged her trunk into the dusty street outside the general store in Calico, California, announcing to anyone within earshot that he had a blind daughter and needed a husband for her before he died. It was 1879, and the mining town perched in the Mojave Desert was filled with desperate men seeking silver, but not a single one stepped forward to claim the pale girl with the clouded blue eyes who stood trembling in the scorching sun. Beatrice felt the weight of their silence like stones piling on her chest, heard the shuffle of boots turning away, and knew with crushing certainty that she was being rejected by every man in town. Her father's voice grew hoarse as he offered a dowry, then doubled it, then promised his small plot of land. But still the miners walked past as though she were invisible. By the time the sun began its descent toward the jagged mountains, her father had given up, his shoulders sagging as he guided her back inside the boarding house where they had been staying for the past week. "Nobody wants damaged goods," her father muttered that evening, not bothering to lower his voice even though Beatrice sat just across the small room. "Lost your sight to that fever when you were 16, and now you are 22 with no prospects. What am I supposed to do with you when I am gone?" Beatrice did not answer. She had learned years ago that her father did not actually want responses to his complaints. He wanted someone to absorb his bitterness, and she had become an expert at being a silent vessel for his disappointments. Her fingers found the worn fabric of her skirt, tracing the stitches she had sewn by touch alone. She had tried to make herself useful after the fever took her sight, had learned to cook and clean and mend without eyes to guide her, but it was never enough. Her father saw only what she could not do, never what she had managed to accomplish despite the darkness. The boarding house room was stifling in the desert heat, and Beatrice could smell the dust that seemed to coat everything in this town. Calico had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the surrounding mountains, and it felt temporary, like a stage set that might blow away in the next strong wind. She heard the constant noise of the mining operations even now, the distant thunder of ore being crushed, the shouts of men, the creak of wagons hauling their precious loads. It was a town built on hope and greed, and there was no place in it for a blind woman who could offer neither labor in the mines nor sight to keep a proper house. 3 days after her father's humiliating display in the street, Beatrice woke to find him cold in his bed. His heart had given out during the night, the doctor said, and there was nothing to be done. The boarding house owner, a thin woman named Mrs. Patterson, stood in the doorway wringing her hands and explaining that Beatrice would need to leave by the end of the week. There were men waiting for the room, paying men, and she could not afford to keep a blind girl out of charity. "Do you have family?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice pitched high with discomfort. "Someone who could take you in?" Beatrice shook her head. Her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn son when Beatrice was 10. There had been an uncle once, but he had headed to Oregon years ago and never written. She was alone in a town that had already made clear it wanted nothing to do with her. "I can work," Beatrice said, hating the tremor in her voice. "I can cook and clean. I can earn my keep." Mrs. Patterson sighed, and Beatrice heard the rustle of skirts as the woman shifted her weight. "Honey, I have got girls with 2 good eyes who cannot find work in this town. The men here want whiskey and cards and other things I will not speak of, but they do not want domestic help. They live like animals in bunkhouses and tents. I am sorry, but I cannot help you." After Mrs. Patterson left, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think. She had $40 that her father had kept in his coat pocket, enough for a stagecoach ticket to somewhere. But where? She had no destination, no friends, no future she could imagine. The darkness that surrounded her felt heavier than usual, pressing in from all sides, and for the first time since losing her sight, she felt truly helpless. That afternoon, she forced herself to leave the boarding house and walk the short distance to the general store. She had memorized the route during their week in Calico, counting steps and listening for landmarks. The store owner, Mr. Chen, had been kind to her, patient when she had come in with her father to purchase supplies. Perhaps he would know of someone who needed help, some family willing to take in a worker in exchange for room and board. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and she heard Mr. Chen's voice call out a greeting. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the air, deep and rough as gravel scraping stone. "She the blind girl?" Beatrice froze, her hand still on the doorframe. She could feel eyes on her, could sense the presence of someone large standing near the counter. The air seemed to change, to grow heavier with his presence. "This is Miss Nolan," Mr. Chen said carefully. "Can I help you find something, Miss Nolan?" "I heard her father died," the rough voice continued, ignoring Mr. Chen's attempt at redirection. "Heard she's got nowhere to go." "That's not really your concern," Mr. Chen said, and Beatrice heard an edge of protectiveness in his tone that surprised her. "I'm making it my concern." Heavy footsteps crossed the wooden floor, and Beatrice resisted the urge to step back as the man approached. She could smell leather and pine and something wild, like the wind that blew down from the mountains. "I need a wife. She needs a home. Seems like a fair trade." The words hit Beatrice like a physical blow. A wife. This stranger, whoever he was proposing marriage as though he were negotiating the purchase of a horse. She found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "I do not even know who you are." "Name is Yates Finnegan," the man said. "I live up in the mountains, about 15 miles north of here. I've got a cabin, good water, game for hunting. I come down every few months for supplies. I heard you were blind, and I figure that works out just fine for both of us." "Works out how exactly?" Beatrice asked, feeling anger rise up through her fear. She had endured her father's cruel words for years, had stood in the street while men rejected her, had been told she was worthless so many times she almost believed it. But this was too much, this cold transaction proposed by a stranger who probably had not even looked at her face. "Because you will never see my scars," Yates Finnegan said, and something in his voice shifted, became almost vulnerable beneath the roughness. "I am not a pretty sight, Miss Nolan. I was caught in a fire 3 years back, and it left its mark. Down here, people stare. They turn away. Children cry when they see me. But you would not have to deal with any of that. And I would have a wife to help with the work, someone to cook and keep the cabin. Like I said, seems fair." Beatrice stood very still, trying to process what he was offering. A marriage of convenience, a practical arrangement between two people the world had discarded. There was a brutal honesty to it that was almost refreshing after years of pity and false kindness. At least this man, this Yates Finnegan, was not pretending to offer her anything more than survival. "I would need to think about it," she said finally. "Take your time," Yates said. "I'm staying at the camp north of town until tomorrow evening. After that, I'm heading back up the mountain. You can send word with Mr. Chen if you decide you want to come with me." She heard him walk away, heard the door open and close, and then there was silence, except for Mr. Chen's soft breathing. Beatrice waited for him to say something, to offer advice or warning, but he remained quiet. Finally, she crossed to the counter, her fingers trailing along the rough wooden surface. "What does he look like?" she asked. "Aside from the scars." Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "He is a big man," he said at last. "Tall, maybe 6.5 feet, built like he could break a tree in half with his bare hands. He's got dark hair down past his shoulders, needs a cut. Beard covers most of his face. The scars he mentioned, they are on the left side, from his temple down to his jaw. Burns, like he said. They look like they hurt." He paused. "But I have known Yates for near about 2 years now, and he has always been fair with me. He pays his debts, does not cause trouble. He lives alone up there in the mountains, trapping and hunting. It is a hard life." "Harder than being homeless in Calico?" Beatrice asked. She could hear the sympathy in Mr. Chen's voice when he answered, "No, Miss Nolan, probably not harder than that." Beatrice bought the few supplies she had come for, counting out coins by touch, and then made her way back to the boarding house. She spent the rest of the day and the entire night thinking about Yates Finnegan's offer. Marriage to a stranger, a man scarred by fire, living in isolation in the mountains. It sounded like the plot of a Gothic novel, the kind of story that ended badly for the heroine. But what was her alternative? She could use her $40 to buy a ticket to another town, but she would arrive just as blind and helpless as she was now, with no guarantee that the next place would be any kinder than Calico. At least Yates was offering her something concrete, a home, a purpose, survival. By morning, she had made her decision. She asked Mrs. Patterson to help her compose a note to Mr. Chen, stating that she would accept Yates Finnegan's proposal and would be ready to leave the following evening. Mrs. Patterson's shock was evident in her voice, but Beatrice cut off her protests. "Ha! I have no other options, Beatrice said firmly. Either I marry this man or I end up on the street. Which would you choose? Mrs. Patterson had no answer to that. She sent her son to deliver the message, and by afternoon, word came back that Yates would collect Beatrice at sunset the next day. Mrs. Patterson helped her pack her meager belongings, and Beatrice used some of her precious dollars to buy a few additional supplies: fabric for sewing, extra needles and thread, a warm shawl for the mountain cold. She would need to be useful in Yates's cabin, would need to prove that a blind wife could still pull her weight. The next evening, Beatrice stood outside the boarding house with her trunk at her feet, listening to the sounds of Calico settling into dusk. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and a slight breeze carried the scent of sage and dust. She heard the jingle of harnesses before she heard the wagon wheels, and then heavy boots hitting the ground as Yates climbed down. "You ready?" he asked, his voice as rough as she remembered. "Yes," Beatrice said, though her hands were shaking. "And where do I sit?" "Here." She felt his hand on her elbow, surprisingly gentle for a man so large. He guided her to the wagon and helped her up onto the bench seat, his hand steadying her as she found her balance. The contact was brief and impersonal, but Beatrice was acutely aware of the strength in his grip, the calluses on his palms. This was going to be her husband, this stranger with the scarred face in the mountain cabin. The reality of what she was doing hit her all at once, and she had to fight down a wave of panic. Yates loaded her trunk into the back of the wagon and then climbed up beside her. The seat dipped under his weight, and Beatrice could feel the solid presence of him, the heat radiating from his body in the cooling desert air. He clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward, and just like that, Beatrice was leaving Calico, leaving behind the last traces of her old life. They rode in silence for a long time. Beatrice listened to the creak of the wagon wheels, the steady clop of the horses' hooves, the distant call of a coyote as night fell across the desert. The air grew colder as they climbed, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She wanted to ask questions, wanted to know what she was heading into, but the words stuck in her throat. What was there to say to a man who had proposed marriage as a business transaction? It was Yates who finally broke the silence. "Gets cold up in the mountains at night," he said, "even in summer. You will need warmer clothes than what you are wearing." "I have a coat in my trunk," Beatrice replied, "and I can sew. If you have fabric or hides, I can make what I need." "You can sew without seeing?" "I can do a lot of things without seeing," Beatrice said, and could not quite keep the defensive edge out of her voice. "I can cook, clean, mend, even do simple carpentry if someone sets up the tools for me. I am not helpless, Mr. Finnegan." "Yates," he said, "if we are going to be married, you should call me Yates. And you can call me Beatrice." Another long silence fell between them. The wagon continued its steady climb, and Beatrice could feel the change in the air, the pine-scented breeze that spoke of forests and higher elevations. They were leaving the desert behind, entering the mountains that loomed over Calico like ancient sentinels. "Why did you really propose this?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "You could have found a wife with sight. There must be women who would overlook scars for the sake of security." Yates was quiet for so long that Beatrice thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I told you, people stare. They are afraid or disgusted, or they pretend I do not exist. I got tired of it. Figured if I had to have a wife, better one who could not see what I've become." "What were you before?" Beatrice asked. "Before the fire?" "A man," Yates said, "just a man. Now I'm a monster living in the mountains, and that suits me fine. I do not need people. I have got my traps, my cabin, my solitude. But I do need help with the work, and I would rather not live alone for the rest of my life." This seemed like the best solution. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to Beatrice about why they wanted her around, and she found herself oddly grateful for his bluntness. No false promises, no hollow words of affection, just survival, pure and simple. They reached the cabin well after midnight. Yates helped Beatrice down from the wagon and guided her inside, his hand firm on her elbow. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine, and Beatrice could tell from the echo of her footsteps that it was a single large room. Yates lit a lamp, though Beatrice suspected that was more for his benefit than hers, and then showed her around by touch. The main room had a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a corner for food storage, and shelves holding supplies. A doorway led to a smaller room with a bed covered in thick furs and blankets. "You can sleep in there," Yates said. "I will take the loft. There is a ladder in the main room." Beatrice turned toward his voice, surprised. "We are not going to share the bed?" "Not unless you want to," Yates said. "I told you this is practical. I am not going to force you into anything. If you want a real marriage someday, that is your choice. But I am fine with the arrangement as it stands." Beatrice did not know what to say to that. Most men would have considered her body part of the bargain, payment for providing her with food and shelter. The fact that Yates was offering her a choice left her off balance, unsure how to navigate this strange arrangement they had entered into. "Thank you," she said finally, "for giving me that choice." "Get some rest," Yates said. "Morning comes early up here and there's a lot of work to be done." Beatrice made her way into the bedroom, her fingers trailing along the wall to guide her. She found the bed and sat down on it, testing the firmness of the mattress. It was surprisingly comfortable, the furs soft and warm. She unlaced her boots and lay down fully clothed, too exhausted to search for her nightgown in the trunk. Within minutes, despite all her anxieties about this new life, she was asleep. She woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood, the rhythmic thunk echoing in the mountain air. Pale sunlight warmed her face, streaming through what must be a window near the bed, and she could hear birds singing in the trees outside. Beatrice sat up slowly, orienting herself to her new surroundings. The sounds and smells were completely different from Calico, softer and greener, and she felt a strange sense of relief. Whatever this life was going to be, at least it would not be the harsh desert town that had rejected her. She made her way out to the main room, using her memory of the previous night's tour to navigate. She found the water bucket near the door and the basin on a shelf, washed her face and hands, and then tried to figure out where Yates kept the food. She was exploring the storage area when she heard the cabin door open. "You are up," Yates said. His breathing was slightly heavy, as though he had been doing hard physical labor. "I should have shown you where things are before you woke up." "I'm trying to learn," Beatrice said. "If you tell me where you keep everything, I can help with breakfast." Yates spent the next hour giving her a detailed tour of the cabin, guiding her hands to each shelf and container, explaining his system for organizing supplies. He was patient with her questions, never rushing or showing frustration when she had to touch something multiple times to memorize its location. By the time they sat down to eat the simple breakfast of bacon and beans that Beatrice had prepared, she felt she had a basic understanding of her new home. "This is good," Yates said as he ate. "Better than what I usually make for myself." "It is just bacon and beans," Beatrice said, but she felt a small glow of pride nonetheless. It mattered to her that she could contribute, that she was not simply dead weight in this arrangement. Over the next few weeks, Beatrice settled into the rhythm of mountain life. She learned the layout of the cabin and the clearing around it, memorizing the distance to the well, the woodpile, the small garden where Yates grew vegetables. She took over the cooking and most of the cleaning, grateful to have tasks that gave structure to her days. Yates spent most of his time checking his trap lines, hunting, and doing the heavy physical labor required to maintain their homestead. They spoke little, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had agreed to share space without demanding more from each other than what was practical. But as the days passed, Beatrice found herself growing curious about her husband. She would hear him working outside, the steady rhythm of the axe or the scrape of a knife against wood, and she would wonder about the man behind the scars. He was always gentle with her, always patient when she needed help with something, but he maintained a careful distance, as though afraid to let her get too close. Sometimes she caught him staring at her. She could not see it, of course, but she could feel it, the weight of his gaze lingering on her face or her hands as she worked. It made her wonder what he was thinking, what he saw when he looked at her. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Beatrice was sitting at the table mending one of Yates's shirts when she heard him come in from his work. He moved around the cabin quietly, putting away tools, and then she heard the slosh of water as he poured some into the basin to wash up. There was a long pause, and then she heard him inhale sharply, followed by a muffled curse. "What is wrong?" Beatrice asked, setting down her sewing. "Nothing," Yates said, but his voice was tight with pain. "Just a cut, it's fine." Beatrice stood up and crossed to where she had heard his voice. "Let me help." "Where is it?" "Really, it is nothing." Yates, I can hear pain in your voice. Let me help. She reached out, her fingers finding his arm. He flinched at the contact, but did not pull away. Where are you hurt? My hand, he admitted. I was skinning a deer and the knife slipped. It is not deep, just bleeding a lot. Sit down, Beatrice ordered, using the tone she had developed when dealing with her father's stubbornness. Let me clean it and bandage it properly. To her surprise, Yates obeyed. She heard him pull out a chair and sit down heavily. Beatrice gathered the supplies she would need by touch, clean rags and the bottle of whiskey Yates kept for medicinal purposes, and then returned to his side. She found his injured hand and carefully took it in her own, her sensitive fingers exploring the wound. It was a deep gash across his palm, still bleeding freely. Beatrice poured whiskey over it, and Yates hissed but did not pull away. She cleaned the wound as thoroughly as she could by touch alone, then used strips of clean cloth to bind it tightly. You need to keep this clean, she said, and change the bandage every day. If it starts to smell bad or if red streaks appear on your arm, you need to see a doctor. Yes, madam, Yates said, and there was something in his voice that might have been amusement. Beatrice realized she was still holding his hand, her fingers resting against his wrist. She could feel his pulse, strong and steady, and the heat of his skin. It was the most intimate contact they had shared since arriving at the cabin, and she felt suddenly self-conscious. But she did not pull away, and neither did he. Your hands, Yates said quietly. They are very gentle. I did not expect that. Why not? Beatrice asked. I do not know. I guess I thought losing your sight would make you harder somehow, but you were soft, kind. I did not expect kindness. Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the guard she had kept around her heart. I could say the same about you, she said. You have been nothing but patient with me since I arrived. That is not what I expected from a man who lives alone in the mountains. Maybe we are both full of surprises, Yates said. They stayed like that for a moment longer, hands touching, something unspoken passing between them. Then Yates cleared his throat and gently pulled his hand back. Thank you for patching me up. Of course, Beatrice said, though she felt strangely bereft at the loss of contact. That's what wives do, is it not? She heard Yates stand up and move away, retreating to whatever corner of the cabin he had claimed as his own. But something had changed between them in that moment of connection, some wall beginning to crack. Beatrice returned to her sewing, her fingers working automatically while her mind replayed the feeling of Yates's hand in hers, the rough texture of his calloused palm, the steady beat of his pulse. For the first time since agreeing to this strange marriage, she found herself wanting to know more about him, wanting to understand the man behind the practical arrangement. The next morning, Beatrice woke early and made a special effort with breakfast, using some of the precious coffee and making biscuits from scratch. When Yates came down from the loft, she heard him pause at the table. This smells amazing, he said. What is the occasion? No occasion, Beatrice said, though she felt her cheeks warm. I just thought we could have a nice breakfast for once. They ate together, and for the first time, Beatrice initiated conversation, asking Yates about his trap lines and what animals he was catching. He answered her questions readily, and soon they were talking more freely than they had since her arrival. Beatrice learned that Yates had been living in the mountains for 5 years, that he had come west from Missouri after the fire, seeking solitude and a place where no one knew him. He spoke briefly about the fire itself, how a barn had collapsed during a blaze and he had been trapped inside, how the left side of his face and neck had been burned before someone pulled him free. The doctor said I was lucky to survive, Yates said, his voice flat. I did not feel very lucky. My wife left me while I was still in the hospital, said she could not stand to look at me anymore. So I came west as far as I could go and found this place. You were married before? Beatrice asked, surprised by the pang of something that felt almost like jealousy. For 2 years, Yates said. She was pretty, always worried about appearances. When I stopped being the handsome man she married, she decided she had made a mistake. I do not blame her, really. It is hard to look at. I would not know, Beatrice said softly. But I know what it is like to be rejected for something you cannot control, to be told you are worthless because your body does not work the way it should. You are not worthless, Yates said, and the fierceness in his voice startled her. You are smart and capable, and you work twice as hard as most seeing people I have known. Anyone who made you feel worthless was a fool. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back quickly. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." After that morning, something shifted in their relationship. They began to talk more, to share stories about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Yates told her about his childhood in Missouri, about learning to hunt and trap from his father, about the dreams he had once had of raising a family and building a good life. Beatrice shared her own memories, the happy years before her mother died, the fear and confusion when the fever took her sight, the long years of her father's bitter disappointment. They were both people who had been broken by life in different ways, and they found comfort in each other's understanding. As summer deepened into fall, Beatrice noticed other changes too. Yates started staying in the cabin longer in the evenings, sitting at the table while she sewed, or sitting near the fire while she knitted. Sometimes he would read aloud from his small collection of books, his rough voice stumbling over the words but persistent. Beatrice loved those evenings, loved the sound of his voice filling the cabin, loved the stories that transported her out of her dark world and into places she could only imagine. One cool evening in late September, Beatrice was preparing dinner when she heard Yates come in, but his footsteps were heavier than usual, dragging. She turned toward the door, concerned. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Fine," Yates said, but he sounded exhausted. "Just a long day. I had to track a wounded bear that got into one of my traps. Finally put it down about 5 miles from here, then had to drag it back." "You dragged a bear 5 miles?" Beatrice asked, incredulous. "Most of it," Yates admitted. "I could not let that much meat go to waste. We will have food for months once I get it all processed." Beatrice heard him lower himself into a chair with a groan. Without thinking, she crossed to him and put her hands on his shoulders, feeling the knots of tension in his muscles. "You are as tight as a drum," she said. "Let me help." She began to massage his shoulders, working her fingers into the tense muscles. Yates made a sound that was half groan, half sigh, and she felt him begin to relax under her touch. She worked slowly, carefully, feeling her way across his broad shoulders and down his back. He was all solid muscle, built like the mountain itself, and she found herself marveling at his strength even as she tried to ease his pain. "That feels incredible," Yates murmured. "You have magic in those hands." "Just practice," Beatrice said, but she was pleased by the compliment. She continued to work on his shoulders until she felt the tension ease, until his breathing grew deep and regular. When she finally stepped back, her own hands were tired, but she felt satisfied that she had been able to help him. "Thank you," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "No one has done something like that for me in a long time." "We take care of each other," Beatrice said simply. "That is what this is it not?" "Yes," Yates said. "That is what this is." But Beatrice was starting to suspect it was becoming something more. She found herself listening for Yates's return each day, found herself smiling at the sound of his voice. When he helped her with tasks around the cabin, his hands guiding hers, she felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. She was beginning to care for him, this scarred mountain man who had given her a home when no one else would. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, she thought he might be beginning to care for her too. The first snow came in early October, a light dusting that made everything clean and quiet. Yates spent that day teaching Beatrice how to navigate in the snow, how the sound changed, how to feel the difference in temperature that indicated a drift. He held her hand as they walked around the clearing, his grip strong and sure, and Beatrice felt safer than she had in years. That evening, they sat by the fire after dinner, and Beatrice gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Yates, can I touch your face?" The silence that followed was so complete that Beatrice could hear the pop and crackle of the fire, the whisper of wind against the cabin walls. She had gone too far, she thought. She had asked for too much. "Why?" Yates asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Because I want to know what you look like," Beatrice said honestly. "I know you by your voice, by the way you move, by the strength in your hands, but I do not know your face, and I would like to." "You will feel the scars," Yates warned. "They are not pretty." "I do not care about pretty," Beatrice said. "I just want to know you." She heard Yates move, heard the creak of his chair as he stood up. Then he was kneeling in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, could smell the pine and leather scent that was uniquely his. He took her hand and guided it to his face, placing her palm against his right cheek. Beatrice explored slowly, carefully, her sensitive fingers learning every line and plane of his face. She traced the strong line of his jaw, feeling the scratch of his beard against her palm. She found his nose, straight and prominent, and his brows, thick and dark. She touched his lips, full and soft beneath her fingertips, and felt him inhale sharply at the contact. Then she moved to the left side of his face, to the scars he had warned her about. The skin was rough and textured, puckered in places where it had healed badly. The scars ran from his temple down past his jaw, covering a large portion of his cheek and neck. But beneath the damaged skin, she could feel the same strong bone structure, the same solid strength that characterized everything about Yates. The scars were part of him, but they did not define him. "You are beautiful," Beatrice said softly, and she meant it. Not because his face was unmarred or perfect, but because it was his, because every line and scar told the story of who he was and what he had survived. "You cannot see me," Yates said, but his voice was thick with emotion. "You cannot know what I look like." "I can see you better than anyone with eyes ever could," Beatrice said. "I see your strength and your kindness and your patience. I see the man who gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. I see the man who reads to me by the fire and teaches me to navigate in the snow. The scars do not change any of that." She felt his hand come up to cover hers where it still rested on his scarred cheek. "Beatrice," he said, and her name on his lips was a prayer and a question all at once. "Yes?" she whispered. "Can I kiss you?" Beatrice felt her heart leap in her chest. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you can." Yates leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to pull away. But Beatrice did not move. She felt his breath on her face, warm and sweet, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning. She responded instinctively, leaning into the kiss, her hand sliding from his cheek to the back of his neck, tangling in his long hair. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent, and Beatrice felt something ignite inside her, a hunger she had not known she possessed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I did not expect this," he said. "When I asked you to marry me, I thought it would be practical, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, I started to care for you, more than I should, more than is probably wise." "Why is it not wise?" Beatrice asked. "Because I am a scarred monster living in the mountains, and you deserve better. You deserve someone whole, someone who can give you a normal life." Beatrice pulled back, her hands finding his face again, holding him so he could not look away even though she could not see him. "You are not a monster," she said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known. You are strong and kind, and you see me as a person, not as a burden. You have given me a home and a purpose, and you have never once made me feel worthless. How is that not better than anything else I could hope for?" "Beatrice," Yates said again, and this time her name was a surrender. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no careful distance. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Beatrice melted into his embrace. She felt safe and wanted, and alive in a way she had not felt since before the fever took her sight. This was what she had been missing, what she had not even known she needed. Someone who saw her for who she was, scars and all, and loved her anyway. They pulled apart eventually, both of them trembling with emotion and desire. Yates stood up and offered Beatrice his hand. "Come to bed with me," he said, "not because we have to, but because I want you. Because I want this to be a real marriage, if that is what you want too." Beatrice took his hand without hesitation. "Yes," she said, "that is what I want." He led her to the bedroom, moving slowly so she could keep her bearings. Inside, he lit a lamp, even though Beatrice did not need the light, and she suspected it was for his own comfort, his own need to see her. He helped her out of her clothes, his large hands surprisingly gentle, and she felt no shame at being exposed to him. She helped him with his own clothes, learning the broad expanse of his chest by touch, the ridges of muscle that spoke of years of hard physical labor. She found more scars, burns that covered part of his left shoulder and ribs, and she kissed them gently, wanting him to know that she accepted every part of him. They came together with a mixture of urgency and tenderness, two people who had been alone for too long finally finding connection. Yates was careful with her, always asking if she was all right, if she wanted him to stop, but Beatrice urged him on, wanting all of him, wanting to erase the loneliness that had defined both their lives. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Beatrice's head on Yates's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "I love you," Yates said into the darkness. "I did not think I would ever say those words to anyone again, but I love you, Beatrice. You have brought light into my life in a way I did not think was possible." Beatrice felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy. "I love you too," she said. "I did not know what love was supposed to feel like, but this is it. You make me feel whole." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and when Beatrice woke in the morning, she felt as though she had been reborn. This was her life now, this cabin in the mountains, this man who had become her whole world, and it was everything she had never dared to dream. The winter that followed was hard in many ways. The snow piled high around the cabin, and there were days when they could not go outside at all. Food stores ran low, and Yates had to make dangerous trips in blizzard conditions to check his traps. But through it all, Beatrice and Yates grew closer, their love deepening with each shared challenge. They learned to work together seamlessly, Beatrice managing the cabin and food preparation, while Yates handled the hunting and heavy labor. They learned each other's moods and needs, learned when to speak and when to simply hold each other in silence. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Yates would describe the mountain landscape to Beatrice, painting pictures with his words so vivid that she could almost see them. He told her about the way the sunrise lit up the snow-covered peaks, about the eagles that soared overhead, about the deer that came to drink at the stream behind the cabin. Beatrice stored these images in her mind like treasures, building a mental picture of her world through Yates's eyes. One particularly brutal night in January, when the wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, and the cold seeped through every crack, Beatrice woke to find Yates gone from the bed. She could hear him moving around in the main room, the soft thud of logs being added to the fire. She rose and wrapped a blanket around herself, following the sound of his movements. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Fire was dying," Yates said. "Did not want you to get cold." Beatrice crossed to him, her hands finding his arm. "Come back to bed," she said. "You need rest too." "In a minute." Yates sounded distracted, and Beatrice frowned. She had learned to read his moods by the tone of his voice, and right now he sounded worried. "What is it?" she pressed. "Something is bothering you." Yates was quiet for a long moment, and then he sighed. "The supplies are running low," he admitted. "Lower than they should be at this point in the winter. I miscalculated how much we would need, or maybe the winter is just harder than I expected. I'm going to have to make a trip to Calico soon to buy more food." Beatrice felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The trip to Calico in winter was dangerous, a full day's journey through mountain passes that could become impassable without warning. And if something happened to Yates on the way, she would be alone in the cabin, blind and helpless. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. 3 days if all goes well," Yates said. "1 day to get there, 1 day to buy supplies and rest, 1 day to get back. I will leave you enough firewood and food for a week, just in case." "I will be fine," Beatrice said, though her stomach was churning with anxiety. "You just be careful. Come back to me." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I will always come back to you," he promised. "You are my whole world now, Beatrice. I am not going to lose you." 2 days later, Yates set out for Calico. He spent the morning before he left preparing the cabin for Beatrice's solitude, stacking firewood within easy reach, organizing food so she could find everything by touch, even rigging a rope from the cabin door to the woodpile so she could navigate safely if she needed to go outside. He made her promise to stay inside as much as possible, to keep the fire going, and to not take any unnecessary risks. "I will be back before you know it," Yates said as he prepared to leave. He pulled Beatrice into one last embrace, kissing her deeply. "I love you." "I love you too," Beatrice said. "Be safe." She stood in the doorway listening as Yates loaded the wagon and hitched the horses. She heard him climb onto the seat, heard the jingle of the harnesses as the horses started to move. The sound of the wagon wheels grew fainter and fainter, until finally there was only silence, and Beatrice was alone. The first day was not so bad. Beatrice kept herself busy with chores, mending clothes and organizing supplies. But by the second day, the silence of the cabin began to press in on her. She was used to Yates's presence, the sound of his footsteps and his voice, the sense of safety that came from knowing he was near. Without him, the cabin felt enormous and empty, and every small sound made her jump. On the third day, Beatrice woke to an ominous silence. The wind had stopped, and the usual sounds of the forest were muted. She opened the cabin door and felt cold air rush in, colder than anything she had experienced before. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. This was the kind of cold that killed, the kind that Yates had warned her about. She closed the door quickly and returned to the fire, feeding it more wood. Yates had said he would be back today. But what if the cold had slowed him down? What if he was trapped somewhere out in the storm? Beatrice tried not to let her mind spiral into panic, but as the hours passed and there was no sign of him, her anxiety grew. By nightfall, she was seriously worried. She had kept the fire roaring all day, burning through more wood than she probably should have, but she needed the comfort of the heat and light. She tried to eat dinner, but could not force anything down. Where was he? He had promised to come back. He had promised. She was sitting by the fire, straining her ears for any sound of the wagon, when she heard something else entirely. A loud crack from outside, like a tree branch breaking under the weight of ice, followed by a heavy thud that shook the cabin. Beatrice jumped to her feet, her heart racing. What was that? Should she go outside to check? But Yates had made her promise to stay inside, to stay safe. She stood frozen with indecision when she heard another sound, the whinny of a horse close by. Then, heavy footsteps crunching through snow, moving toward the cabin. Yates. It had to be Yates. Beatrice rushed to the door and flung it open, not caring about the cold that blasted in. "Yates?" she called. "Is that you?" "It is me," came the rough, exhausted voice she loved. "I am here." Beatrice heard him stumble, heard him catch himself against the cabin wall. Something was wrong. She could hear it in his labored breathing, in the way his footsteps dragged. She moved forward carefully, her hands outstretched until she found him. He was frozen, his clothes stiff with ice, and he was shaking violently. "Oh God, Yates, you are freezing," Beatrice said. She got her arms around him and helped him into the cabin, slamming the door behind them. "What happened? Where's the wagon?" "Had to leave it," Yates managed through chattering teeth. "Snowed too deep. Took one horse, left the other with a rancher along the way. Tree fell across the path about a mile from here. Had to leave the horse and walk the rest of the way." Beatrice got him close to the fire and started stripping off his frozen clothes with shaking hands. His skin was like ice beneath the wet fabric, and she could feel him trembling uncontrollably. This was bad. This was very bad. She needed to get him warm, needed to prevent hypothermia from setting in. She pulled all the blankets and furs from the bedroom and piled them near the fire. Then she stripped off her own clothes and pulled Yates down onto the blankets with her, wrapping both of them together in the furs. She pressed her body against his, sharing her warmth, rubbing her hands up and down his arms and back to increase circulation. "You're going to be all right," she murmured over and over like a prayer. "You're home now. You're safe. Just hold on." Gradually, over what felt like hours but was probably less, she felt Yates's shivering begin to subside. His skin grew warmer under her hands, and his breathing evened out. He wrapped his arms around her and held her close, burying his face in her hair. "I thought I was not going to make it," he said hoarsely. "The cold was so bad and I could not see more than a few feet ahead. But I kept thinking about you here alone, and I had to keep going. I had to get back to you." "You did," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "You made it. You are here." They held each other through the night, neither willing to let go. By morning, Yates had recovered enough to sit up and eat some of the food Beatrice prepared. He told her about the trip, how he had made it to Calico without incident and bought the supplies they needed. But on the way back, a massive storm had blown in, worse than anything the locals had seen in years. The temperature had dropped so fast that the road became nearly impassable and trees were falling under the weight of ice and snow. "I should have waited it out in town," Yates admitted, "but I kept thinking about you here alone and I could not stand it. I had to try to get back." "You could have died," Beatrice said, her voice shaking. "You could have frozen to death out there, and I would never have known what happened to you." "But I did not," Yates said, taking her hands in his. "I am here, and I am fine. And I brought back enough supplies to last us through the rest of the winter and then some. We are going to be all right." Over the next few days, as Yates recovered fully from his ordeal, Beatrice realized how much he had come to mean to her. The thought of losing him had been unbearable, had shown her just how deeply she had fallen in love with this scarred mountain man. He was her whole world now, her partner in every sense of the word, and she could not imagine her life without him. As winter slowly gave way to spring, life in the cabin took on a new rhythm. Yates taught Beatrice to do more complex tasks, trusting her capabilities in ways no one ever had before. She learned to split kindling, to card wool, to identify herbs by smell and touch. She learned the sounds of the different animals that lived around the cabin, learned to tell the weather by the feel of the air and the behavior of the birds. She was not just surviving in the mountains, she was thriving. One warm day in late April, when the snow had finally melted and the first green shoots were pushing up through the soil, Beatrice realized her monthly courses had not come. She was never irregular, and as the days passed and still nothing happened, a suspicion began to grow in her mind. She was carrying Yates's child. She waited another week to be sure, and then she told him one evening as they sat by the fire, "Yates, I have something to tell you." He turned to her and she could feel his attention focus completely on her. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," Beatrice said, and felt a smile spread across her face. "We are going to have a baby." The silence that followed was so complete that Beatrice felt a moment of doubt. Was he unhappy? Did he not want children? But then she heard him make a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and suddenly he was pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Beatrice, I did not think I would ever have this. A family, a real family." "You have it now," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "We have it, you and me and this baby. We are a family." Yates became even more protective after that, trying to do all the heavy work himself and fretting whenever Beatrice lifted anything heavier than a teacup. She had to remind him constantly that she was pregnant, not helpless, and that she was perfectly capable of continuing with her usual chores. But his concern came from love, and she could not really be annoyed with him for it. As summer arrived and the baby grew inside her, Beatrice found herself thinking about the future in ways she never had before. She would be a mother, would have a child to raise and teach and love, and her child would grow up knowing that blindness did not make someone less valuable, did not make them less capable. Her child would have two parents who loved each other and who had overcome their own scars to build a life together. In early autumn, when the leaves were turning gold and the air was crisp with the promise of winter, Beatrice went into labor. Yates had arranged for a midwife from a nearby homestead to come stay with them as the due date approached, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Willow who had delivered dozens of babies and was completely unfazed by Beatrice's blindness. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through an entire day and into the next night. Beatrice clung to Yates's hand, drawing strength from his presence even when the pain became almost unbearable. Mrs. Willow encouraged her, told her she was doing wonderfully, assured her that everything was progressing normally. And finally, just before dawn, Beatrice heard the thin, angry cry of her newborn child. "It is a boy," Mrs. Willow announced. "A big, healthy boy with a fine set of lungs on him." Yates was crying. Beatrice could hear it in his voice as he thanked Mrs. Willow. Then, the baby was in Beatrice's arms, still wet and warm and squirming, and she felt a rush of love so powerful it took her breath away. This was her son, hers and Yates's, a perfect combination of both of them. "What should we name him?" Yates asked, his voice full of wonder. Beatrice ran her fingers gently over the baby's face, learning his features by touch. He had his father's strong jaw already, she could tell, and a full head of hair. "William," she said. "After my grandfather, he was the kindest man I ever knew, besides you." "William Finnegan," Yates said, trying out the name. "I like it. Hello, William. Welcome to the world, son." The months that followed were challenging in new ways. Beatrice had to learn to care for an infant without being able to see him, had to rely entirely on touch and sound to know what William needed. But she adapted, as she had adapted to everything else, and soon she was as capable a mother as any sighted woman. Yates was completely devoted to his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or holding him while Beatrice rested. The love between the three of them filled the cabin, making it truly a home. As William grew, Beatrice taught him the same skills she had learned, how to navigate by sound and touch, how to be aware of his surroundings. But she also encouraged Yates to teach him all the things a mountain boy needed to know: how to hunt and trap, how to track animals, how to survive in the wilderness. William would grow up with the best of both his parents, she thought. He would have Yates' strength and her determination, and he would never feel limited by anything. 2 years after William was born, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the labor, while still difficult, seemed easier somehow. Their second child was a girl, small and delicate with Beatrice's fair coloring. They named her Sarah, and she was the light of Yates' life. He carried her everywhere, this tiny daughter who looked up at him with complete adoration, never flinching from his scars. "She does not see the scars," Yates said one evening, wonder in his voice. "She is too young to understand that I am supposed to be frightening. She just sees her father." "That is all any of us see," Beatrice said gently. "Your children will grow up knowing that scars do not define a person. They will learn that from watching us, from seeing how we love each other, despite everything the world tried to tell us we should be." As the years passed, the Finnegan family thrived in their mountain home. William grew into a strong, capable boy who could track a deer through the forest and quote poetry with equal skill. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, with a gift for music that emerged when Yates brought home a fiddle from one of his trips to town. The cabin rang with laughter and the sounds of the children playing, and Beatrice sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was really her life. Yates built additions onto the cabin as the family grew, adding a separate bedroom for the children and a larger kitchen area. He cleared more land for a garden, and Beatrice became skilled at growing vegetables and herbs. They were largely self-sufficient, needing to go to town only a few times a year for supplies they could not produce themselves. It was a hard life in many ways, but it was also deeply satisfying, and Beatrice had never been happier. One spring evening, when William was 8 and Sarah was 6, the family was sitting outside watching the sunset. William was describing the colors to Beatrice, as he often did, painting pictures with his words the way his father had taught him. Sarah was playing her fiddle, practicing a new tune. Yates had his arm around Beatrice, and she was leaning against his solid warmth, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "Mama," William said suddenly, "why did you and Papa get married?" Beatrice and Yates exchanged a glance, or at least Beatrice assumed they did, based on the pause that followed. "Why do you ask?" Beatrice said. "I heard some men in town talking," William said. "They said Papa is scary-looking and you cannot see, and they did not understand why you would be together. But I think you are the happiest people I know. So why did you get married?" Beatrice felt Yates tense beside her, knew that the old wounds had been prodded. But before she could answer, Yates spoke. "Your mother and I got married because we were both people the world did not want," he said quietly. "I had scars that frightened people, and your mother was blind, and everyone said we were less than we should be. But when we found each other, we realized that the world was wrong. We were not broken. We were just waiting for the right person to see us for who we really were." "I do not think you are scary, Papa," Sarah piped up from where she sat with her fiddle. "I think you are the strongest, best Papa in the whole world." Yates's voice was thick when he answered. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me." "And I do not think you are less because you cannot see, Mama," William added. "You can do everything, maybe even more than people with eyes." Beatrice felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "You two are the best children anyone could ask for," she said. "Your father and I are very lucky." As the sun set and the stars began to come out, the Finnegan family sat together in the gathering darkness. Sarah resumed her fiddle playing, the sweet notes drifting across the mountain air. William continued to describe the emerging stars, pointing out constellations to his little sister. And Beatrice and Yates held each other, thinking about how far they had come from that day in Calico when a desperate woman had accepted a proposal from a scarred stranger. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked softly, so only Yates could hear. "Marrying me, taking on a blind wife?" "Not for a single second," Yates said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice. You gave me back my life, gave me a reason to live beyond just surviving. You gave me love and a family and a purpose. How could I ever regret that? I feel the same way, Beatrice said. That day you proposed, I thought I was just choosing survival. But I was choosing so much more than that. I was choosing love, even though I did not know it yet. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to their children play and laugh. Finally, as the evening grew late and the mountain air turned cold, Yates stood and began gathering up the children. "Time for bed," he announced, and there were the usual protests and negotiations before William and Sarah finally trudged inside. After the children were settled in their beds, Beatrice and Yates sat by the fire in the main room, as they had done countless times over the years. Yates was whittling something, the soft scrape of his knife against wood a familiar, comforting sound. Beatrice was knitting, her fingers flying over the needles by touch alone, creating a new sweater for William, who was growing at an alarming rate. "I have been thinking," Yates said after a while. "Maybe it is time I took you to Calico again. You have not been back since the day we left, and I thought maybe you would like to see what has become of the town." Beatrice considered this. She had no real desire to return to the place that had rejected her so thoroughly, but she understood what Yates was really offering. He wanted to take her back there as his wife, as the mother of his children, as a woman who had built a good life despite what everyone had thought was possible. He wanted to show them that they had been wrong about her, about both of them. "All right," she said, "we can go, but not to prove anything to them, just to get supplies and maybe see Mr. Chen if he is still there. He was kind to me when others were not." "Mr. Chen is still there," Yates confirmed. "He asks about you every time I go to town. I think he would be happy to see you again." The trip to Calico was arranged for the following month, when the weather was good and the roads were clear. They brought both children, wanting them to see the town and understand where their parents' story had begun. The journey took 2 days with the children, stopping to camp overnight in a meadow halfway down the mountain. William was fascinated by everything, asking a million questions about the landscape and the animals they saw. Sarah was more reserved, staying close to Beatrice and holding her hand tightly. When they finally rolled into Calico, Beatrice could hear the changes immediately. The town was bigger now, louder, with more people and more permanent buildings. The mining boom had continued, and Calico had transformed from a temporary camp into a real town with a future. Yates guided the wagon to the general store, and they all climbed down. Beatrice heard the bell chime as Yates opened the door, and then Mr. Chen's familiar voice calling out a greeting that broke off in surprise. "Yates Finnegan? And is that Miss Nolan? Mrs. Finnegan?" "Hello, Mr. Chen," Beatrice said, smiling in the direction of his voice. "It is good to hear your voice again." "And these must be your children," Mr. Chen said, his voice full of wonder. "My goodness, how life has changed. Come in, let me look at you all." They spent an hour in the general store, with Mr. Chen exclaiming over William and Sarah and telling them stories about their parents. He kept saying how happy he was that things had worked out, that he had always hoped Beatrice would find a good life with Yates. Other townspeople came in and out, and Beatrice could hear their whispers, their surprise at seeing the blind girl who had been rejected by the whole town, now surrounded by a loving family. One woman approached while Yates was loading supplies into the wagon. "Mrs. Finnegan?" she said hesitantly. "I do not know if you remember me. I am Agnes Patterson. My mother ran the boarding house where you stayed." Beatrice remembered. Mrs. Patterson had been the one to tell her she had to leave after her father died. "I remember," she said neutrally. I just wanted to say," Agnes continued, "that I am sorry for how the town treated you back then, for how my mother treated you. It was wrong. You deserved better." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected apology. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "It was a difficult time, but it led me to where I needed to be. I am happy now, truly happy, and I do not think I would be if things had gone differently." "You have beautiful children," Agnes said, "and your husband, he looks at you like you hung the moon. You are very blessed." "I am," Beatrice agreed, "very blessed indeed." As they prepared to leave Calico, Beatrice realized that the town held no power over her anymore. The rejection she had felt all those years ago was just a memory, something that had happened to a different person in a different life. She was no longer the desperate blind girl standing in the street while men walked past. She was Beatrice Finnegan, wife and mother, a woman who had built a life of meaning and purpose in the mountains. Calico could not take that away from her. The return journey was peaceful, with the children falling asleep in the back of the wagon. Yates and Beatrice rode in comfortable silence, hand in hand on the wagon seat. As they climbed back into the mountains, back toward home, Beatrice felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for Yates, for their children, for the life they had built together against all odds. "I love you," she said suddenly, squeezing Yates's hand. "I do not think I tell you that enough." "You tell me every day," Yates said, "in 1,000 little ways, but I never get tired of hearing it. I love you too, Beatrice, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Years continued to pass in the mountains, each season bringing its own challenges and joys. William grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick mind and gentle nature. Sarah became a gifted musician, her fiddle playing, bringing joy to everyone who heard it. Yates and Beatrice grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work, but their love never diminishing. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Beatrice by taking her to a special place he had found in the mountains. It was a meadow filled with wildflowers, hidden away where few people ever ventured. He described it to her in detail, the riot of colors, the way the flowers swayed in the breeze, the snow-capped peaks visible in the distance. "This is where I want to be buried someday," Yates said, "both of us together, in this beautiful place, surrounded by the mountains we love." "That's a morbid thought for an anniversary," Beatrice teased, but she understood what he meant. They had built something beautiful together, something that would outlast their physical bodies. Their love, their children, the life they had created, would continue long after they were gone. "I just want you to know," Yates continued, "that every day with you has been a gift. You took a broken man and made him whole again. You gave me a reason to live, a reason to be better. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God every day that you said yes when I asked you to marry me." Beatrice reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the familiar lines and scars that she knew better than her own features. "You gave me exactly the same things," she said. "You saw me as a person, not as a burden. You believed I could do things that no one else thought I could. You loved me when the world said I was unlovable. We saved each other, Yates. That is what we did." They stood together in the meadow, holding each other as the sun warmed their faces and the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. Two people who had been discarded by the world, who had found each other in desperation and built a love that would last a lifetime. They had proven everyone wrong, had shown that scars and blindness were just parts of them, not the sum total of who they were. As they grew older, William took over more of the physical work around the homestead, allowing Yates to finally slow down. Sarah married a young rancher from the neighboring valley, a kind man who loved her music and treated her with respect. She visited often with her own children, filling the cabin with noise and laughter. William eventually married too, bringing his wife to live on the mountain, building his own cabin nearby so he could help care for his aging parents. Yates and Beatrice spent their final years surrounded by family, watching their grandchildren grow, passing on the stories of how they had met and fallen in love. They taught the next generation that differences should be celebrated, not feared, that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that the opinions of others mattered far less than the truth you knew in your own heart. When Yates finally passed away at the age of 75, peacefully in his sleep with Beatrice beside him, she felt as though part of her own soul had been torn away. But she did not regret a single moment of their life together. They had had 43 years of marriage, years filled with love and laughter, hardship and joy. They had raised children and grandchildren, had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Beatrice lived for 3 more years after Yates's death, cared for lovingly by William and his family. She spent her days telling stories to her grandchildren, teaching them to navigate by sound and touch the way she had learned so many years ago, passing on the wisdom she had gained through a lifetime of overcoming obstacles. And when her own time came, she faced it with peace, knowing that she had lived a full and meaningful life, that she had been truly loved and had loved in return. They buried her next to Yates in the meadow full of wildflowers, just as he had wanted. William read a passage from one of the books Yates had loved to read aloud by the fire. Sarah played her fiddle, the sweet notes drifting across the mountain air. And the family that Yates and Beatrice had created stood together, honoring the two people who had proven that love could transcend any obstacle, that scars and blindness were nothing compared to the strength of two hearts beating as one. The story of the blind woman and the scarred mountain man became a legend in the area, passed down through generations as a testament to the power of love and acceptance. People told their children about Beatrice and Yates, about how they had found each other when the world had given up on them both, about how they had built a life of beauty and meaning in the mountains. The cabin stood for many years as a reminder of their love, maintained by their descendants, a place where people could come and remember that true love sees with the heart, not with the eyes. And in the meadow where they were buried, wildflowers continued to bloom every spring, painting the mountains with color, a living memorial to two people who had dared to love when everyone said they should not, who had built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their lives, who had proven that the world's judgments meant nothing compared to the truth they had found in each other's arms. Their love story became the foundation upon which their family built their own lives, teaching each new generation that love was not about perfection or appearance, but about seeing the true essence of another person and choosing to cherish it. William told his children about how his father had offered his mother a home when she had nowhere to go, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love that sustained them both through decades of life in the mountains. Sarah taught her children that their grandfather's scars had never diminished him in her eyes, that she had always seen only his strength and gentleness. The cabin in the mountains remained a gathering place for the Finnegan family for generations. They would come together there for holidays and special occasions, filling the rooms that Yates had built with laughter and music and love. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sit by the same fireplace where Beatrice and Yates had spent countless evenings, and they would listen to the stories of their ancestors, learning the lessons that only true love could teach. In the end, the tale of Beatrice and Yates Finnegan was not just a story about a blind woman and a scarred man who found each other in desperate circumstances. It was a story about the transformative power of love, about how two people who had been told they were less than whole had found completion in each other. It was about courage and resilience, about building a life of meaning, despite what the world thought was possible. It was about seeing beyond the surface to the heart beneath, about choosing love over fear, hope over despair. And so their legacy lived on, not just in the children and grandchildren they left behind, but in the lesson they taught everyone who heard their story. That love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds, that acceptance and understanding can transform lives, and that sometimes the people the world rejects are the ones who end up building the most beautiful lives of all. The blind woman who no man wanted and the scarred mountain man who thought himself a monster had found each other and created something extraordinary, a love story for the ages, proof that the heart sees more clearly than any eyes ever could.